Okay, so let's go and grab some of our images. So I went on Pexels and grabbed a few files, a few pictures so that we could use those together. And I believe these are the 3 that I ended up using. So I'll just drag all of those right into Photoshop and drop them in. And I'll just push enter on each one of them as they come up. Okay, so now we have our 3 pictures. I'm gonna put those in a group, so I'm going to select all of those by holding shift and clicking at the bottom layer, and I'll do Control G to group those. I'll call that original photos. Alright, the next thing that I want to do is I'm just gonna rearrange these because I know that I'll want my background image to be this tree stump. Then I'll get my turtle out of this image, and then I'll take this castle and put it on top of my turtle. So now I'm going to duplicate this picture in the background. I'm just going to do Control J or Command J on a Mac, and you can see it's still in that original group. So I'm just going to pull it to the top, and now I can put it back down on the bottom. So let's do Control T or Free Transform, so that we can bring that out to the edges and give it a full background. And I want that tree stump to be quite a bit bigger. And remember, I want this to stay a smart object. That's going to maintain the resolution that it came in with, and it's also going to let us make changes to it later if we need to. So next, let's grab our turtle out of here. We're just going to do Control J again. Now we can drag him out. And I'm going to hide the background so that I can select out my turtle. So there's a few things that are a little bit awkward with this guy. First thing is that as it goes into the distance, it gets a little bit blurry. And then this arm right here on the left is not quite as sharp as this arm that's in the foreground here. So we're going to have to make some adjustments with that using our tools to try to give us a little bit better of an image. But first thing I want to do is just try out this object selection tool and see if we can get that turtle just by selecting him with this. So it did a pretty good job, but I want the feet selected out too. So let's try it again. That's pretty close. It's not quite perfect. You can see it didn't grab his whole foot, and there's some awkwardness on there, but that's a good start. So we're going to click this layer mask tool, which you might remember from last time. And let's go ahead and go to the paintbrush, and we're going to paint with black and white to try to get that foot back. So I'm going to start with white so I can see that foot. And I'll push X to switch it back to black. And I'll zoom in, and we can start kind of clicking away at it. And remember last time, what I was doing was click, hold shift, and click again to get a straight line. Alrighty, so that's not terrible, not the best, but let's set the hardness now down a little bit so we get more of a fuzzy edge, and we can kind of round off that shape that we have here. Because if you remember, this back foot is quite blurry, and so we don't want the edges to come off really sharp if we don't have that kind of resolution from our original picture. I can kind of round out that to his belly here. We can give it a little bit more hardness as it gets closer. And just kind of shave that off a little. That should be good. Now let's clean up just under this claw down here too. So since this is right in the foreground, it has a lot of data, and so we can use a really strong hard brush and clean up those edges with very crisp lines. In the corner right here with a very small brush. And if you remember, I'm using the bracket keys. So the left bracket to make it smaller and the right bracket to make it larger. Make it smaller again. Clean up that nail and that edge. And I don't think that people will be looking too closely at things, but we want to make sure that it's as clean as possible. So you can see here that it's getting quite a lot of that reflection from the rock under here, and it didn't do quite a good job of selecting out this claw, because there wasn't enough contrast for it to tell the difference. So I'm just going to leave this inner part a little bit because I don't want to do too much to it right now. I just want that crisp edge just on the edges of the claws, and then I'll make it a little bit softer. Maybe not that soft. Control Z. Just to give it a little bit more of that blurry edge, since that's all it had when we started off. And remember, we're using a mask here, and that means that we still have that pixel data underneath it. We're not erasing it. We're just hiding it. And so I'm going kind of fast on this, but please just take your time on your selection, because it'll help get a cleaner, clearer picture. And I don't like how sharp that edge looks right there, so I'm just going to kind of round that out a little bit. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is turn this background really bright. And the reason I want to do that is try to make sure that I got everything selected. So if I do edit, and then fill, it should be Shift F5 for you. And we want to do color, and we'll just pick a really bright magenta and click OK. And so if you had a lot of selection that was maybe down here that didn't get picked up, you should be able to see things like that now. You could also set it to pure black or pure white if that makes it easier to see, but you just want to make sure that you don't have anything super jarring. So here's something that I want us to do, and I'll show you more with the background layer in just a moment. So we have our turtle. This is our new background, by the way. So we have our turtle selected out. I'm going to do Control T to bring up Free Transform, and I'm going to make him bigger. And in fact, I think I want him to be where it looks like he's just climbing over this ledge. And then I want the whole background image to be bigger with him. So I'll do a selection. I'll select that background layer and our turtle layer. And now do Control T and I can scale them together. And I think that should be good, but we want to save this as, or we want to leave these as smart layers so that if we want to shrink that down again or move that around, it'll still look fine. Okay, so we have our turtle. He looks kind of photoshopped into our tree background. And so there's a few things that we want to do. I think I want to rotate him just a little bit, so I did Control T, and now when I hold my arrow just a little bit to the outside of that box, I can click and drag and let him rotate a little bit, and that'll give us a similar perspective, a similar angle to that tree trunk. And something from the videos that I had you watch talked about perspective, and what I want you to just notice is that we're looking down at this tree trunk and we're looking down at this turtle as well. And you can tell because we can see the top of his shell, not his belly, and we can see the top of this tree trunk. And so if we were to picture this as a solid ellipse and kind of picture his shell as a solid ellipse, we could picture that the horizon line is probably somewhere up here, just to give us that flat angle, so maybe a little bit down even. So we just want to keep that in mind. We don't want to put this turtle up here, or to put it too high, because then it'll look like he's not sitting properly. Okay. Now, let's go back to our original photos and cut out the castle that's going to sit on top of them. So I'm going to do Control J, drag that out, and I can close my photos again. Oops. There we go. And I want to do the same thing I did with the turtle, with the castle. So I'm going to try to get a good selection just from this object selection tool. And that did a really good job. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click this mask. And it gives us a really good start. And there's some bits of the clouds from the original picture that are bleeding through still. And some of this edge doesn't look quite clean. So now let's go through and clean it up. Okay. So let's make our brush extra crispy. And I want to make sure that I'm on the right layer. And this is where, if you're working on that hot pink background, it's going to help you a lot by being able to see what parts you're missing. And you don't have to be so precise because we'll make a lot of changes as we go. That can definitely help you out. What I'm trying to do is make the largest selections that I can first. I want to get as close to the edges as I can, and then I can make my brush much larger and do a more sweeping change. Alrighty, that's looking pretty good. I want to reveal a little bit of the grass that's down here. I don't want it to cut it off completely because I want it to look like it's growing out of the back of the turtle. Even though it did a really good job of selecting out that grass, which is awesome for it. So I think I'll cut it off about there, and then we can switch it to a fuzzier brush so that it's not such a harsh edge. You can see some of that hot pink bleeding through there, so that we can make sure that our selection was fully selecting. And we reached the edge of the canvas here, so we want to kind of make sure we don't get that crispy line on the edge, but it should be cut off by the top of the turtle's head. So I'm going to disable the layer mask so I can see how much of this got cut off or how well it did. And it looks like it did really well, so I can move on from there. It looks like it missed a little bit of that piece. And it looks like it accidentally selected well, maybe not. I think those were meant to be highlights on those corners though, not see-through. And we can clean up that window right, or that corner right there. Okay. Put in some of those highlights again. It did a really good job with the selection. I'm really impressed. And we want to make sure things aren't too cut off. Nope, it did good. I'm pretty sure that was just highlight though. And it looks like it thought this part was highlight, but it was sky. Okay, I think we have a pretty good selection of our castle. So what I'm going to do is turn on all our layers, move the castle on top of the turtle, and done. Just kidding. So I want to select all of, our turtle and our castle layer. I'm going to group that and name it selection. Because if I make changes to it, I want to make sure that I have the original selection so I don't have to do that part again. Alright, so we've made our selections. Let's go ahead and duplicate that. And we'll call this edits. Alrighty, so now we need to get into the part that makes it look like they're all connected. So part of that is adjustment layers, part of that is layering this turtle head on top of our castle. Part of it is warping our castle onto the shell. we've got a lot to do. So let's go ahead and start with the castle and make sure that it looks like it's properly sitting on our turtle. So I'm gonna hide this back selection, and with Control T, I'm gonna right click and click on warp. And it's gonna say we need to turn it off of a smart object layer, and we'll just click OK. So we can go over here and rasterize it, and now we can do Control T again and click on warp. And I'm gonna set this to a 4x4, which gives us a little bit more control, and just ever so slightly try to move this castle so that it feels like it's stretching down around this tortoise shell. And part of that might make it a little bit crazy. So just don't let stuff like that happen. Just take your time and go slow. Go back and make adjustments if you need to. We're not trying to warp it too much. We just want it to look like it could almost feasibly set on top of this turtle shell. Whoa. Something that I'm trying to keep in mind is keeping these vertical lines as close to vertical as I can. I'm going to click OK with that. Go ahead and confirm it. And then I'm also going to rotate it just a little bit off to the right. I think that looks pretty close. I'm using my arrow keys to kind of push it left and right just a little bit more gradually. I'm pretty happy with that so far. If I hide this and turn it back on and off, I can see that it's overlapping my turtle's neck. So what I want to do is make a selection of his neck. I think I'll use the lasso tool for this. And I want to make sure that I grab the portion of the turtle that seems to be overlapping the shell. So I can just do Control J there. And I want this mask still, so I can do Control click on the mask to get that same selection pulled up. And on my turtle head, I'll just click the selected mask tool again. And I can raise that above my castle layer so that it looks like it's overlapping. Now that I'm here, I can see that there's a really thin line across the edge of my castle. And I want to get rid of that. So what I'll do is I'll Control click on my mask thumbnail. And I want to do Select, Modify, and Contract. And I only want it contracted by about 1 or 2 pixels. And so that moved that selection in a little bit. And now, if I do Control Shift I, what that does, let me undo that, is when I do Control Shift I or Command Shift I on a Mac, it's going to go from selecting what's inside the castle to everything around it. So you can see that because that border line showed up. So now I can go back in and paint with black and just kind of clean up the edges. So I'm going to do Control H to hide that dotted line. And we can kind of clean up that edge. I don't need to make too big of a change, but I want to make sure that it's not giving us any big giveaway lines. And I think maybe 2 pixels was even too much, so let's kind of undo. We'll repeat the whole process again, and we'll just do select, modify, contract. We'll just do it by 1 pixel even. So I'll do Control Shift I to select around it and paint with black. Oops. I'll do Control H to hide my dots, my marching ants. I think that looks a lot better. A lot crisper of an edge, I think. We can go through and just find anywhere that it looks like it got just a little bit far away from the castle. Any of these giveaway highlights. Okay, now that's looking really good so far. It feels like it's sitting on our turtle for the most part. Maybe here we could expand it just a little bit more. So I'm going to go in with my mask. I'm going to do Control D to deselect that selection that was hidden. And now I'm going to paint with white so I can reveal a little bit more of that grass that was around that turtle shell. Maybe we can paint with black to hide a little bit of that edge over here. I'm painting with a fuzzy brush, and the reason for that is it's further in the distance, so we have a little bit of that that depth of field effect happening. And so we want to get rid of a little bit of those crisp edges. And we can paint away a little bit at this edge over here so that it looks like we still have that shell. And as we get closer, we might want to make our brush a little smaller, or we might want to make the hardness increased of our brush, just so that we can get a little bit crisper of an edge to kind of match the depth of field towards the front of our turtle. Alright, that's a pretty good start, I would say. I'm going to group those all together. Oh, they are grouped together. And so now we have our turtle and our castle both separate. And so that means when I move them around, I can do Control T and they move as one object. I'm going to distort this just a little bit. So I'm going to right click on Distort just to kind of set him more on that tree trunk than he is already. I don't want to make too big of changes because I don't want that warp to really be visible, but just a little bit, that should be good. Now here's some issues that I still have. This back leg is having a lot of that depth of field where it's got very crisp edges right here, very high contrast, and here it gets a little bit fuzzier. You can see a little bit of that green ring around this turtle as well, so we're going to do what we did earlier. And so first I'm going to do it on the background version of him. So I'm going to hide the castle, I'm going to select my turtle, I'm going to do select, modify, contract by 1 pixel, Control Shift I, so that changes my selection to the outside. And then I'm going to do Control H to hide, but my selection is still there. And I'm just going to paint with black around those edges to try to get that ring off of him. That's going to give him a little bit less of that look like he was brought in from a different picture, even though he was. Probably on the back it's there a little too, so we can go ahead and just make sure that we got everything. And then it looks like there's a little bit more of that haze here, so I'm going to do select, modify, and this time instead of contract we're going to do expand, and we'll do it by 2 pixels. And so since it was already selecting the outside, that's why we expanded it, so that it shrinks it in towards the turtle. And we can continue just painting away that green halo. Okay. So we did that around the outside of the original turtle layer. Now let's make sure that we do that around the outside of the head of the turtle layer also. I'm going to go ahead and name my layers too. Okay. So what I can do is control click on the layer that we got our original turtle and go up to our turtle head layer and do Control Shift I to select the outside, Control H to hide it, and it's going to use the same selection that we used for the original turtle to kind of work off of. Alright, that's looking a lot better. Okay, so now let's do a little bit of color edits and a little bit of blurring. So what I'm going to do is duplicate my group again. I did Control J with it selected. And we're just going to call this one blurs. So we wanted those selections to be on their own layer, so that with this layer, what we can do is rasterize them together, and we can start to blur things out as a whole. So I'm going to click on the group itself and do Control E, or you can do, it should be merge content. So we'll do Control E, and it makes it all into one layer. And so what I want to do is I want to blur out this front leg so that it's about even with these other legs, so it's not standing out so much. So I'm using this blur tool right here. We also have sharpen and smudge, and we could try sharpening this back leg just a little bit, just to see if it brings it forward a little more. What it's doing is making the darks darker and the lights brighter, and it helps a little bit, but it's not going to get it up to this point. And so what we'll do is actually just bring this one down by going to the blur tool. And it takes a few clicks, but it'll start to look a little bit more blurred. And in fact, let's go ahead and undo all the way to where we merged it. I'm just going to duplicate it so that we can see both the effect of it once we're done. So I'll go with the blur tool, and I have my strength set pretty high at 75. A few clicks there. I want to make sure that I blur out this back leg too, because it looks a little bit weird, and I really want it to look like it blends into that background. I'm going to blur out the belly. I'm going to blur out this part of the belly too. I don't want to touch his other leg with the blur tool because it's already so fuzzy. I don't want to affect it too much. And we might even hit it with that sharpen tool again just to try to bring out a little bit of that contrast and bring it up to this level. And now if I hide that layer, you can see what a big difference it made on this front leg when I toggle these on and off. And even on this back leg, when I'm turning this on and off, you can see that the sharpen tool really affected it too. So that's a big change. That's helping a lot. I'm going to delete this original blur and just delete the word copy from this first one. And I'm going to go through and blur out the castle a little bit too, so that it has about that same depth of field effect just from that back edge. So it feels like the whole thing is transitioning into the picture, and you can see even better what depth of field is from this tree trunk alone, where we're going from very visible individual leaves and pieces of bark and these little mushroom tufts, but when we're back into the distance a little bit, it gets so blurry that you can't really tell what's happening back here. You just know that it's probably grass or leaves. And so we want to give a little bit of that sense here too. Not too much though, just enough. And that might have been too much over here even. Maybe we can try to use the sharpen tool to bring some of that back, but it's okay. And something else is inside of these windows. I want to make sure I'm hitting it with the blur tool as well. Okay. Alright, so we've blurred out kind of these edges so we have a little bit more of that depth of field. And now what I want to do is add in the shadow of my turtle. I'm going to move him up a little bit with the arrow keys. I'm going to add in the shadow of my turtle. And so what I'm going to do is make a selection of my turtle and the castle by just holding Control and clicking on the thumbnail. And on the layer that's blank, I'm going to do Edit. Actually, what I'll do is use the eyedropper and grab a shadow color from this tree trunk so that it's not pure black. And then I'll do Edit and Fill and foreground color and click OK. Alright, so now even though it's behind that layer, we have that shape of our turtle, and you can tell from the lighting on the tree that it's mostly coming from kind of the front a little bit to the left, but mostly top down. And it's pretty overcast, it's pretty fuzzy lighting. There's not any crisp shadows on these mushrooms. So what I'm going to do is free transform it with Control T, and I'm just going to squish it down. And I want to just try to line up these edges to the turtle's claws. So I might do that with warp or perspective or distort. Probably warp. And I'm going to do Control H so I can hide those handles and just kind of push it around using just what I can see. And that'll give us just a little bit more of that shadow shape underneath there. That's pretty good. And now I'm going to change the blending mode of that shadow from normal to probably multiply. And I'm going to take the opacity and turn it down so that it's just a kind of lazy cast shadow. And we don't want it to be too dark. We want it to match kind of what we have around here, so that it feels pretty natural still. And what I'm going to do is use my brush tool. I want the soft brush, maybe not too soft, but pretty soft still. And I'm just going to kind of fuzz out the edges of that so that it feels more overcast. It doesn't feel so sharp of a shadow. Erase away parts. Alright. And hit that into multiply. Whoops. There we go. So if I toggle that on and off, hold on, I did it on a separate layer. So let's set that all back to 100 and I'll merge those down. Control E. And now I can set it to multiply and set this down to about 75 all at the same time. So now you can see how much, oops. How much that adds to the feeling of that turtle genuinely sitting in our scene. And there's some spots where there's crevices here that we might want to drop that shadow down into so that it feels like a real shadow. We might want to erase away some spots. We'll use a soft brush. Just to give it a little bit more sense, like it's really sitting in the scene. And we could probably drive ourselves crazy on this, but we don't want to go too hard just because if they're looking at these little shadows here, they're missing the point of the whole picture. So don't drive yourself crazy with anything, just give yourself a good start. Okay, and then with that we can also blur out that edge of the shadow too. Alright, now something with our original picture, so I'm going to name this background. Something with our original picture is it doesn't have the same depth of field blurring effect that we've caused on our turtle happening on the tree trunk itself. So I'm going to duplicate that background. I'll hide the other ones. And I want to take my blur tool and kind of blur it around to match, and it rasterized my layer for me. I want to blur it around to match what we have with our turtle right here. We really don't want the original camera to give away that we've photoshopped this. And so for me, what that means is if it's close to this camera, close to the lens, then it's sharp. If it's farther away, it's out of focus. We want the turtle's face and part of this castle to be the most in focus, so we can even kind of brush over the whole front piece just a little bit to give it that sense that it's all part of that same, it was all from that same picture originally. Okay, that seems like a good start. Something with my turtle that's not happening with the castle is the lighting is hitting the top of his head, and it looks like a more white bluish lighting than this warm pinkish lighting. So what I want to do is add some effects on there to give it a little bit more of a sense that it's hit by that same warm light. So what I can do first is maybe select this pinkish hue, maybe from my castle, maybe from this background color, and we'll just give it a gradient. And right now I'm going to select this gradient that transitions from that brownish color to no fill, not white, and we'll just kind of layer that on top, just a little bit of a haze, and we'll go from normal to overlay. And so that's going to start to give us a little bit more of that hue. And what I'm going to do is clip that onto my turtle. So I'm going to right click and say create clipping mask. And so if I turn that on and off, you can see that it's affecting my turtle and my castle. And I believe my castle, we've moved it around a little since then, so I might have to make a little bit of a selection of my castle using my select and mask tool, and just hide some of that with the black, painting with black, so that it's really just affecting my turtle. And if overlay wasn't strong enough, we might try vivid light. And I don't really want it to hit the bottom of his face so much, so I might paint with a little bit lighter of a brush and just knock a little bit of that back on the turtle. So now that's my change. Excuse me. I might add a little bit of paint on kind of the tops of his legs, and make sure that that's visible here. I can erase away at that a little too. I don't need it to be too powerful, and I don't want it to hit where it's not going to be visible. Okay, so this is my before and after, before, after. So that's a good start on my turtle. It's really starting to look like it's part of the scene now, but we want to keep going. We want to still affect it so that it feels like it's all part of the scene together. So another thing that we could do is when we add an adjustment layer, sometimes making that adjustment as a whole feels like it's affecting the whole picture. And so we can add in something like brightness contrast maybe, and brighten up the whole picture. And that's going to make it start to feel like it goes together, like it's all being affected by the same things. We might add in hue saturation, maybe boost the saturation just a little bit. In fact, what we might do is dull the saturation just on our turtle and castle. So I'm going to clip that to our turtle. We can toggle that on and off and see the difference. So we can turn their saturation down a little bit on their part, And then with a hue and saturation layer above that, we can warm that up just a little bit. Maybe tilt the colors just a tad. So that's what it looks like when I toggle that on and off. And then let's change the curves a little bit too. Let's do the color balance and the curves. So with color balance, let's go ahead and grab those shadows. And we want to make them a little bit of these cooler shadows. And with the highlights and midtones, we'll make it a little bit warmer, bring some of that red, yellow light in. And if that was too intense, we can change the opacity of that over here so that it's not affecting it quite as hard as we added that in. So now if I group all of these together, we can turn off and on our layers just to see what kind of difference we've been making. And we'll ungroup those. Okay, and last, let's add a curves layer. And I want to bring my darks up a little and my lights down a little. And I want to make an S curve, which is just a subtle bend to bring the darks darker and the lights lighter. And that might be too intense over here if I'm looking at my picture, so I can kind of adjust these as I go. You can see that it's really starting to look like it was all part of that same picture now. Okay. And then lastly, what I want to do is add a gradient that has kind of this yellowish light that's passing through all of this grass here. So I'm just going to select part of that that looks really bright and warm. And I'm going to add a new layer and make a gradient and make it over the whole thing. And it's going to let me do that haze again, and we'll do it with the overlay or maybe just soft light. And if I want to, I can press Control U, and it's going to bring up that hue saturation adjustment when but just have it affect the layer that's here. And that can let me tilt that color to where I want it to be. So I think I want it to be a little bit warmer like this. And I don't want it to be quite so powerful, so we can desaturate it just a little, maybe take it up to white a little bit. And we can bring the opacity down just a bit. But that's giving us a pretty cute little turtle scene. Alright, now with all of that, we can do Control G on our turtle. We might put our shadow in there too. We could even add a shadow layer. Under his shell just a little bit. And I'm painting with a low opacity right now. I don't want it that close to his face. I want his face still popping out. I can just brush this on and erase out what I like. So it gives me a lot of control over that light. I'm going to set that to multiply and lower the opacity just a bit. So if I turn that off and on, you can see how big of a difference that made. And I'm trying to select shadows and lights from my scene. And then I want to adjust the castle a little too, because as you can see on my turtle, he has this bright highlight still on him coming from the right. So I want to give the castle a bit of a rim lighting as well on the back end of it, so that it's not just being hit by light on this left side. So let's select that layer. Actually, we don't need to. We'll just add a new layer. And I'm gonna grab light from that same layer from the turtle, or that same light color from the turtle, and I just want to paint it really quickly over the edge, this back edge of the castle. I'm not being too precious with it right now because I'll change it later. But I want to hit anything that would be getting lighting from this direction. It's looking pretty good. Okay. And then I'm going to use probably a screen or maybe a soft light. We'll just kind of peer through here and see what's affecting it most close, so that that lighting feels the most similar to the lighting on the turtle. I think that this pin lighting is looking the most similar, so we'll select that. And then I'm going to use my eraser tool and pop some of that back a little. And trying to keep in mind the planes of this castle that are most at that similar angle to the turtle. So if there's spots that are in shadow here, I don't want them to be hit by light either. And that'll give us a little bit more credibility of our picture too. So that gives it just a little bit of glow to that back edge and makes it feel like it's part of the same image that the turtle is. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. There's not anything that I'm really uncomfortable with or wanting to change so much. Just maybe down here I might blur that just a little bit more because I don't want his I don't want your eyes being directed over here. I want your eyes to be looking at his face in the castle. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. The last thing that I want to do is give this a border, so we can use our shape tool and set it to rectangle. And we'll do it set to subtract from front shape, and we'll set the fill to white. And I'm just going to select out a border. I'm going to hold shift so that I get a perfect square. Oops. There we go. And then I'm just going to select that and the background shape and use the move tool to make sure that it's centered on the canvas, and that gives me a little bit more of a photo border. And now I have my little fantasy composite image. So try to use these tools on your own. pick out some images and try to combine them together and create your own little imagination idea. So let me know if you have any questions. I know that this demo is coming out really late because of being sick, so you should have until next Sunday to get this in. And if you aren't sure what to do, if you have questions, if this isn't making sense, please let me know or join the Discord and ask each other, because I think that you can do really well at this. If you have, if these images end up looking really good, we'll print them out and use them for decorating the hall of the Arts and Humanities building, and so the really good ones, we'll put them on display. So if you like them, go ahead and sign them at the bottom too. Alright, I think that's everything for me. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.